Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our first big conversation at Woodside Park. We are honored and privileged to have with us tonight Dr. Laurence Buckman. Dr. Buckman is a dear friend of the Woodside Park community, has been there for, well, Dr. Buckman will tell you exactly how long you've been there for. And dear friend of Woodside Park. Let me just get rid of the... Dr. Buckman will tell you exactly how long you've been there for. Apologies about that. Sorry, technical issue. 1 second. Okay, apologies. That was the background sound from the YouTube page. Okay, let's start again. Okay, so we have Dr. Buckman with us, who, as I said, is a dear friend of the Woodside Park community. Dr. Buckman is an impressive guy, and I'm sure you will all gain tremendously from hearing him. Just to list sort of one or two things about Laurence. Was the chairman of the British Medical Association's General Practitioners Committee between 2007 and 2013. He also was the London president of the Jewish Medical Association, and was a retired GP as of a few months ago, and has recently come out of retirement to help out with this current situation and really do all that he can to help his former practice. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome you, Dr. Buckman, to the broadcast. Good evening, Laurence. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. I hope you're okay too.
Yeah, thank God. Doing well.
Good.
So first of all, thank you very much for coming on. And you were one of the first few that I asked, and to be honest, some others were nervous to be the first. So thank you very much for allowing yourself to be number one and braving it with me here tonight. And I just wanted to maybe hear a bit from you about what you do and what you did do and what you can bring to the table tonight, because I'm sure that I've missed some things out. So please do share your experiences and how you got to where you are.
Well, after being a hospital doctor for a few years, I qualified in 1977. I became a GP in Boreham Wood for 10 years, and then I moved to Temple Fortune Health Centre, where I was for 26 years. And during that time, I was also, as you said, the chairman of the BMA GPs committee. And for 20 years, I was one of the BMA spokesmen. So I did an awful lot of television and radio during that time. I still do radio now, but no telly anymore, I don't think. And I retired in March 2019. And I thought that was the end of it. And when I heard that the NHS was in trouble about 6 weeks ago, I volunteered to go back. The NHS took an amazing time to come and say hello to me, so I just went back to my practice, and I've done sessions for them. I also have various other jobs that I do, which I haven't retired from. I work for the General Medical Council. I also work for the Royal College of General Practitioners. I do various other things as well, and I'm a psychotherapist, which I have been doing for 40 years and still do. But I'm now being retrained as a COVID assessor, which means the kind of doctor who, you'll be really unlucky if you speak to me, the kind of doctor who is there to decide on great cases whether somebody should or should not be admitted to hospital. Where it's obvious they should be admitted to hospital, or where it's clear they really don't need to be admitted to hospital, then it won't come to me. But the great cases from all over the UK will come to me. And I'm being retrained to do that and getting some special gear so that I can do it from my own home.
That sounds amazing. And, I think it's incredibly inspiring to hear about people like yourself who have come out of retirement to really give of themselves and to be of service to so many people that need it. I myself was at Nightingale Hospital yesterday doing a training for chaplaincy. And there was a GP there, two GPs there who had both also recently come out of retirement and were just desperate to give as much as they could to the situation. And I just wanted to hear from you what motivated you to come out of retirement and why you made that decision.
Well, firstly, I couldn't stand idly by and watch other people working at risk of death themselves. I didn't want that they should die, and I wouldn't have helped. Secondly, there is a mitzvah called Rabbi, which applies to doctors, which means you will surely heal him, and more so to doctors than anybody else. And Jewish doctors really shouldn't be retired in the true sense of the word, because you're never retired. You can't stop. You can not work anymore, but you can't retire, because the duty to heal doesn't stop because you retired from some job or other. And so I felt that I should do it, partly as a Jew, but mainly because it's an obligation from the General Medical Council that you should be doing these things. And whilst not very eager to be an intensive care doctor, and indeed my intensive care knowledge is at least 30 years out of date, but I thought I could do something useful to help in the background somewhere. And in fact, the COVID assessor is right in the foreground. It's the person you talk to if 111 can't decide what to do with you. And there's a group of doctors, about 400 doctors, being trained up to do this, to decide, it's a terrible term, it's called disposal, to decide how to dispose of the patient, where they should go to next. And that means if I think an ambulance is necessary, I get the ambulance. I don't dial 999, I press a button and an ambulance turns up, which is really pretty good, actually. I could fancy doing that. And it's a way of protecting the NHS, but also making sure that no patients fall through the cracks. You don't want somebody who's a bit doubtful, maybe you shouldn't admit them, maybe you should. Well, a doctor can decide that properly rather than a computer and a lay person. And that's what it's for.
Wow, fascinating. So taking a step back from what you do for a second, I was just curious to hear from you. You know, lots of us are watching the news and seeing how the UK seems to be doing sort of a bit worse, if that's a bit of an understatement, than other countries around the world. And I'm wondering what you might have to say about why that would be. Why do you think more people seem to be dying in the UK than anywhere else?
I think there's one primary mistake that was made early on, and it's obvious. We didn't have the testing facility that we needed to do contact tracing right the way through the pandemic, and that was a terrible mistake. It's not that it was a decision taken by Boris Johnson and the current ministers. We've slowly run down our health service, but in particular, the laboratory services behind the front line. And assessing virology is not some Mickey Mouse thing. It's got to be done by people that know what they're doing. And the fact is, we didn't have the public health laboratory facilities that we should have done, because we've slowly been chipping away at them for the last 30 years. And surprise, surprise, they weren't ready. So when the pandemic started taking off, not the very beginning where there was contact tracing, but where it started taking off, and it was obvious we were never going to make it at that point, and it was clear that the labs were going to fall over, which they did, we should really have pushed for much greater laboratory activity at that time. I know we've done it now, although interestingly, he only got over 100,000 tests on one day, and since then it's gone backwards. But the testing thing, you can't do contact tracing without testing. And the only way you can protect lives, really, is to contact trace every single infection. Obviously, when there's thousands and thousands of people, you can't do that anymore. But at the beginning, it could have been done. In the middle, there was almost no point in doing it. And now, as it's coming down again, now is the time. So the fact is, we're doing something that's maybe 3 months too late, but at least the laboratories are there now. I also think in general that comparing death rates in countries is almost pointless, because different people count them in different ways. The only true way you can compare deaths, really, is excess deaths per 100,000 of the population. And that's a very complex statistical calculation, but at the end of it, you then get a much clearer idea of who did well and who did badly. For example, in Belgium, they don't count COVID deaths the same way we do. So you've no idea what's going on in Belgium. I know it looks like they haven't got many, but that's partly because they only count the ones they tested. Hopeless. And There are many other countries where comparisons are very difficult. But if we look at Korea, where they did test and did record it properly, they've got the example of early and continued testing.
Well, so based on that, then, thank you for that. Based on that, when do you expect things to get back to normal over here in the UK? I know it's hard to predict this type of thing, but what would you say? What would you?
I don't think we'll be back to normal until there's a reliable, safe, mass-produced vaccine, whenever that is, and that will be relative normality. There's never going to be normal. It's never going to be like that. But it will be nearly normal once we can vaccinate the entire population, and that's talking about 66 million doses produced in a factory somewhere, which means you're going to need one heck of a factory to do that. You know, somebody working in a kitchen isn't going to do that. It's got to be absolute mass production, which I believe is possible. There are several big players now.
So, Dr. Buckman, there was something else I wanted to ask you as well, and that is also what motivated me to ask this question was, again, my experience yesterday at Nightingale Hospital, where it was fascinating to hear from the faculty and how they were talking about the sort of the new understandings they have in medicine and what they can sort of help other hospitals with, given the experience they have. And I'm just wondering whether you personally see any changes to medicine in this country coming as a result of this crisis, sort of maybe any silver lining perhaps as well.
Yes, I think we'll know a lot more about virology in general. We'll know more about transmitting infection. I think we'll be much more careful. I mean, doctors and the lay public will be much more careful about spreading infection. I think we will understand this amazingly nasty virus, which seems to do beyond giving you a cough and a fever. And I think the learning from that, and particularly how to manage very, very sick people, and not only keep them alive, but actually return them to reasonable health. That level of learning has been impressive, and I think will stay with everybody. I don't think that's lost knowledge.
Wow.
We will also discover the use of antiviral medicines and how they can be used to treat viral illnesses other than the one for which they were originally invented, because we're experimenting with all sorts of things that have never been used for COVID, because COVID is a new illness.
Now, another question over here for you. How much of a role do you think the patient's psychological well-being plays in their ability to fight a disease such as COVID?
Well, once they're unconscious, of course, it doesn't have any role at all. But before they become unconscious, there is no doubt that the way you feel is influenced. The way you feel physically is influenced by the way you feel mentally. And people who have a positive outlook tend to do better than people who are negative, for whatever reason. People who have intense anxiety, their body chemistry changes. People who are depressed have different body chemistry, and those chemistries affect various illnesses. So I think psychological balance helps physical balance, which must inevitably reflect on how you do if you have a relatively mild COVID as opposed to one that knocks you unconscious.
And just wondering whether you have any interesting or touching or meaningful experiences from this period. Anything you could possibly share with us, obviously without disclosing anything which you can't.
Of course.
But I'm just wondering whether there's any stories you can share of sort of hope or human resilience or anything that you'd like to bring to the table over here.
Yes, I mean, a couple. One of my patients was having considerable family difficulties, relationship difficulties with several family members. And unfortunately, they got COVID, actually quite badly, and ended up in hospital. And we talked vaguely about it before they went in. But what was interesting is when they came out, suddenly and I'm very pleased to note, almost everything was forgiven. They were not in a position where they were going to die, but they were ill enough to be in hospital, and their exit from hospital produced an outpouring of love, which I thought was impressive and actually very welcome in this particular case. So there's no doubt the patient going through COVID affects the relatives. Another case where I had to intervene was where a patient who had a COVID-ish story but wasn't really terribly ill, and their spouse contacted me and said they're not settling. And so I said, well, and I took a history, and it sounded like they ought to be in hospital. So I said they should go, and I was told very firmly no. So we had a three-way conversation, which I'm afraid ended with me pointing out that the end point of their decision-making might be death, and that I thought they should get in the ambulance. And after some more hesitation, which was quite impressive, they finally agreed to get in the ambulance, which was lucky because they just missed intensive care by a hair's breadth. And they're at home now and they're fine. And it worked out okay. And it's probably only because I insisted very much against their wishes, well, against the patient's wishes anyway. The spouse was quite convinced, but the patient was having none of it. Anyway, it all ended happily.
Wow, amazing. I can really sort of, thinking back to going back to my time yesterday at Nightingale, something which really struck me, and it's something I wrote on my Facebook post today, was the fact that I really saw the human side to the medical teams over there, and they really saw the human side to the patients as well. And something one of the doctors was sharing with us was the fact that until now it was something which was sometimes overlooked. He said doctors are problem solvers, and that's what they're usually used to doing. But when it came to a situation like COVID, where the problem was unsolvable, as he put it, something else came to the table. And at Nightingale, they were suddenly became more aware of how important the emotional and the spiritual side of things were for the patients. And that was something which I was incredibly moved and touched by. And I'm just wondering whether you have a similar experience to the way the NHS is dealing with this, and sort of newfound understandings in these areas.
Well, I'd like to think that I had the understanding a long time ago.
Yeah, I'd like to think so too.
I haven't come to a new reality.
Right.
Certainly, when I was a hospital doctor, quite a senior hospital doctor, we had a rule: you never said anything in front of a patient that you didn't want them to hear, even if they were ventilated, and certainly even if they were unconscious. Because it's amazing the number of times patients have reported what they thought they were dreaming, but they did actually hear what you said. So we had a rule: you spoke to the patient. This is when I was a hospital neurologist. You spoke to the patient always, and you didn't say something about them that you didn't want them to hear, because you never know when they're going to hear it. And as for the spiritual side, I've seen an awful lot of people get better because the spiritual side of them has been paid attention to. Not everybody has a spiritual side, but those that do, and it's a surprising number, including people who don't actually profess to have a religion, who actually do benefit from somebody telling them that there is some point to all of this. Because if you follow the logic of there is no point, then we might as well all kill ourselves. There is no point in living at all. And frankly, there's no point having doctors because you're all going to die. Well, I don't see it that way. Actually, I don't see it as me versus God either. It's not, who's going to win today. There is something about spiritual nurturing and actually nurturing the person. They're not just bed 52. They're not just somebody with a disease. They are a human with a family. And equally, when they die, they're not a number. One of the deaths was a colleague of mine. Such chap who was a student with Elise and I. And he was a lovely man, a senior consultant, very decent bloke, who I've known since we were teenagers. And he went back out of retirement and into an intense setting, and died from COVID, and that's very sad for him and his family. But no, none of these people are numbers. We talk about them 29,000 or how many it is. That's just like talking about an army. These are people, and they have families, loved ones, parents, children, and it's we should never forget that it's a person, never. And even if they're on a ventilator in an induced coma, they're still a person.
Yeah, indeed. At Nightingale, it was unbelievable what they do over there. They have a little sort of booklet which every patient gets when they come in to the hospital, and it's a questionnaire. Things like what's your name, the obvious, but then things like what's your favorite hobby, and what message would you like to give to your loved one, and things like that, which sort of turns the patient into a person, and allowed them to have their dignity, which they so desperately needed at that point, because in the intensive care unit, the dignity is very difficult to retain. So I just was incredibly moved by how much the NHS have really seen that and have cared about that and have put so much effort into that. I wanted to ask you, actually, in terms of what the NHS have done. This is just a curious question on my part, because I was at the hospital, and it's incredible to see how many beds they had set up and how much they'd managed to achieve in such a small amount of time. And I know there's a lot of complaints out there of people saying, well, it was a waste of money, it was a waste of resources. See, we didn't need it, and why did they put so much effort into something which ultimately wasn't used? What I was thinking is, when I buy car insurance, I don't complain that it was a waste of money because I didn't have a car crash. And I'm just wondering whether that's a good analogy, or maybe the NHS did make some mistakes over there in terms of the...
No. This is one of the things they did very, very well. If you'd not had the capacity for intensive care ventilated patients, way beyond anything you could ever imagine in your worst nightmares, remember their worst nightmare is 500,000 dead. If you don't have capacity that will be able to cope with that, it's absolutely pointless having the rest of the health service. If you can use these units when you need them and stand them down when you don't need them, that's exactly right. I hope none of these hospitals ever get used and not a penny is being wasted. This is absolutely the right thing to do. If you don't insure against this kind of thing, you have the situation like they had in Italy and elsewhere, where they were exporting patients to other countries because they couldn't handle the numbers. And the NHS didn't fall over. And that's something we should be very proud of.
Wow. That's nice to hear. It's nice to hear that, some positivity in a world where people seem to be gravitating more towards the negativity. It's just the last point I wanted to make over here before we wrap up. And that is that, again, I think it's something I sort of mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, but specifically with you and with all those NHS sort of staff and workers and doctors and nurses that I've been in contact with, distant contact with, I've been incredibly inspired by the fact that they don't see this as their job. They see this as their human duty. They see this as something which they can contribute to humanity as a whole. It's not about the paycheck at the end of the month. It's not about sort of the job that they have. It's about how much they can be of service to other people, and that's been incredibly inspiring. And I'm hearing that from you as well.
Yeah.
What motivated you to sort of step out of retirement and come back into the world of medicine was purely because you wanted to be able to give to.
Yeah. It wasn't the money. That's for absolutely good.
Yeah, but
there's almost no money. There's some money, but very little. And nor should there be. I'm quite happy as long as I don't lose money doing it. I'm quite happy to do it. And the whole point is not about money. I couldn't bear watching my colleagues, and I couldn't bear watching patients die. And if I could do something, also just reassuring people who've not got COVID that they haven't got it. Even that would make a huge difference to a lot of people. Not every cough is COVID. Not every fever is COVID. And we need to help people feel more comfortable, particularly if they haven't got it. And if they have got it, to reassure them that the vast majority of people, especially the younger ones, are not going to be ill with it. They are not going to die from it. An awful lot of children are going to have it and never know. And if I can ease people's minds, That's part of the job. You know, I can't fix somebody who's in intensive care. You need somebody else to do that, not me. But all the people who aren't in intensive care, of course, the vast majority, with or without COVID, those people I can help.
Wow, thank you very much. It's been an honor and a privilege to have you on here, and I've just learned a tremendous amount just having this short conversation with you. And just on behalf of everyone that's watching, both on YouTube and on Facebook, I just wanted to wish you sort of Hatzlacha Rabba, real good luck and success with everything you're doing for us, in the community and beyond. And may these challenging times come to an end very soon. And just once again, thank you so much for coming and sharing with us. Welcome. And being who you are. And I look forward to seeing you and everyone in person, hopefully very soon. I'm wishing you a very good night, wishing everyone a very good night. Keep safe, everyone, and enjoy.
Good night.
Bye-bye.